Trading in a Halloween Brexit for a Christmas ballot. British MPs vote to hold an early election on December 12th, the UK's third trip to the polls in just 5 years. Iraq's rival political parties agree to work together to oust the country's prime minister. It comes after over a dozen anti-government protesters were killed by masked attackers. And a day of highs and lows for protesters in Lebanon. Celebrations broke out as the prime minister announced his resignation, but earlier protest sites were attacked, with demonstrators blaming supporters of Shiite politicians. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom here in Paris. Thank you for joining us. It's not the gift many in the UK wanted for the holidays. The country is heading for yet another general election this December. MPs voted in favor of holding an early election after deadlock over Brexit led to the EU extending the deadline until January 31st. The legislation now goes for a vote in the House of Lords. Andrew Hillier has the details.
The ayes to the right, 438. The noes to the left, 20. So the ayes have it.
The UK is hurtling towards what could be its third general election in 5 years. MPs in the lower chamber of the House of Commons approved legislation that paves the way for a vote on December 12th, after they threw out an amendment put forward by opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn to hold an election 3 days earlier. Good news for UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He's repeatedly called for a vote, saying it's the only way to break the Brexit impasse. It's the fourth time that the UK leader had tried to get Parliament's approval for an election. The turnaround came after Jeremy Corbyn, against the wishes of many of his own MPs, shifted to supporting a December vote. He says he changed his mind after the threat of the UK leaving the EU without a deal was finally removed.
And I've said consistently, when no deal is off the table, we will back an election. Today, after much denial and much bluster by the Prime Minister, that deal is officially off the table.
Boris Johnson is gambling on using the election to get his majority back. He lost it in September when he expelled more than 20 of his own MPs from his party for voting to block a no-deal Brexit. Even before the vote, a spokesperson confirmed that 10 of the MPs had been admitted back into the Conservative Party. The legislation now goes to the House of Lords, where it's almost certain it'll be approved.
Moving over to Iraq, where the country's two largest political parties have agreed to work together to meet the demands of protesters. State media reports that the populist Shiite cleric, who is the leader of parliament's largest bloc, asked the leader of the second largest group to help him introduce a vote of no confidence against the prime minister. Their alliance comes after the country's already violent protests saw even more bloodshed when a group of masked gunmen opened fire on protesters, killing 18 people and wounding hundreds of others.
Out in force despite a violent police crackdown that has left so many of them dead. In Baghdad's Tahrir Square, what has become the protest's symbolic heart was packed with Iraqis determined to bring down the government.
We're staying put in Tahrir Square until the corrupt government goes. Their time is up. We're sick and tired of them.
Amidst thick clouds of tear gas, these protesters have defied a curfew imposed by the authorities. Every day they grow in number, using sit-ins and strike action to heap pressure on the country's leaders. Further south, in the holy city of Najaf, protesters saw their demands championed by Muqtada al-Sadr, one of Iraq's most influential Shiite clerics, seen here at the wheel of his car. He invited his political rival, Hadi al-Amiri, who leads the second largest bloc in parliament, to work towards triggering snap elections. Pressure is growing on Iraq's leaders to find a political solution that will stem the violence. In the Shiite holy city of Karbala, 18 people were reportedly killed on Monday night, but officials say they are not responsible for the spiraling death toll.
We arrested violent people. They were captured by video surveillance cameras setting objects on fire. There were even some protesters wearing military clothing and carrying clubs.
That flies in the face of the conclusion of an inquiry carried out by the government itself, in which it slams the police for using heavy-handed measures. At least 240 people have already lost their lives since the unrest began at the start of the month.
The armies of Turkey and Syria exchanged deadly fire along their border late Tuesday. It's the first time the two countries have clashed since Ankara launched their anti-Kurdish offensive in northern Syria earlier this month. The violence complicates the situation on the ground, which was otherwise calm. Earlier Tuesday, the Turkish president confirmed that Kurdish forces successfully made the deadline to withdraw from a designated border zone. Turkish and Russian forces are now set to begin joint patrols to verify the Kurdish withdrawal. Anti-government protesters in Lebanon scored a victory this Tuesday. After nearly 2 weeks of demonstrations, Prime Minister Saad Hariri announced his resignation. The president, Michel Aoun, hasn't formally accepted that resignation yet, and even if he does, Hariri would remain in office until a new government could be formed. Hariri said he wanted to give the country a, quote, positive shock to break the deadlock, but some fear his resignation could lead to even greater instability. Andrew Hillier has more on today's developments.
A key demand has been met, but it's not enough to get them off the streets. Despite Saad Hariri's resignation, thousands of people across Lebanon rallied to keep up the pressure on the government. The centre of Beirut was packed with protesters, determined to stay put.
The resignation was our first demand. It's a big victory for us because it wasn't just political games. It's what the people called for.
I thank Hariri because he heard our demands. We don't want a dysfunctional government, chaos or war. We want the money corrupt politicians stole back, and we want to live in dignity.
In the hours leading up to the former Prime Minister's resignation, supporters of Hezbollah rampaged through a protest camp in Beirut, torching tents and chasing away demonstrators. It marks a violent turning point in the protests, which had remained largely peaceful up until now. Only last week, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah took aim at the movement. But for Saad Hariri, 2 weeks of protests had left the former Prime Minister with no other choice but to bow to public pressure.
I put my resignation in the hands of the President and all the Lebanese people. Positions come and go. But what's important is the dignity and security of the country.
But experts warn that Lebanon's economic stability could be under serious threat. Protesters have brought the country to a standstill for 2 weeks. They accuse the ruling elite of squandering Lebanon's economic potential.
Protests against inequality in Chile continued for a 12th day this Tuesday, with thousands rallying in the capital, Santiago. The mobilization continues despite concessions offered by President Piñera, including small increases in minimum wage and higher taxes on the wealthy. Protesters, though, remain unsatisfied. They are calling for changes to Chile's constitution, which they say provides the legal basis for the country's market-driven system. In the U.S. state of California, firefighters are battling blazes in both the north and the south. Authorities say that the fire burning near the Getty Museum in Los Angeles was likely sparked by a broken tree branch that was blown into power lines by high winds. As a precaution, electricity remains cut off to at least 500,000 homes and businesses in northern and central California. The state is expecting strong overnight winds, which authorities worry could both fan the flames and start new fires. And finally, some good news for fans of the cult TV series Game of Thrones. The show will be getting a prequel after all. After reports that HBO had dropped another prequel, the cable channel confirmed that they will be coming out with a spin-off set 300 years before the original, titled House of the Dragon. Game of Thrones ended its run in May to the dismay of fans worldwide, many of who were disappointed with the season finale. HBO hasn't said when the new series will air. I know I, for one, will be eagerly awaiting it. That's all for now, but stay with us here on France 24. Coming up next is The Debate with François Picard.